The air that rolled out of NW 774, one on that October morning, did not smell like 30 years. It smelled like linseed oil and sawdust, the way Earl Covington's hands had smelled every evening of their marriage. And for a moment, Miriam did not move, because breathing felt like a kind of reunion she had not been invited to. She stood in a gravel lot behind a corrugated metal auction barn in Bland County, Virginia, at 7:45 on a Wednesday morning in mid-October. The fog had not burned off. The mountains were just outlines, blue-gray suggestions of something enormous hiding behind gauze. The only sounds were a diesel generator running somewhere behind the barn, and the rhythmic clicking of a beagle's nails on a truck bed. Copper, 14 years old and mostly deaf in his left ear, watched her from the bed of the pickup, with the patient disinterest of a creature who had seen enough mornings to stop being impressed by them. Miriam Covington was 68 years old. She was 5'3". She was wearing her dead husband's canvas work jacket, which was too big for her. The cuffs were rolled twice. In her hands, she held a pair of bolt cutters she had borrowed from a neighbor named Lewis Dalton, because in 68 years of living she had never once needed bolt cutters. And she did not own a pair. The railroad car in front of her was NW 7741, Norfolk and Western surplus, and its padlock was not merely locked, it was rusted shut, fused into itself by 3 decades of Appalachian weather. Rain and frost and summer heat had welded the shackle to the hasp, until the two were essentially one object. The paint on the car's flank had oxidized from boxcar red to something closer to dried blood. A strip of old Norfolk and Western stencil was still legible near the door roller. It read, NW 7741, Return Empty, Ingalls Ferry. She positioned the bolt cutters over the shackle and squeezed. Nothing. The hasp was 3/4-inch case-hardened steel, and the rust had added another layer of resistance. She repositioned, set her feet wider on the gravel, and leaned her entire body weight into the handles. She was patient about it. She was patient the way someone is patient who has spent 31 years filing land deeds in a county assessor's office, cross-referencing decimal points that most people would never notice were wrong. The lock sheared on the second full effort. The sound it made was sharp and final, like a bone cracking. She pulled the hasp free and gripped the door handle and hauled the boxcar door open. The roller screamed on its track, a sound that had not been made in 30 years. And then the air came out, and it was not stale, and it smelled like linseed oil and fresh-cut oak, as though someone had been working in there last week, as though someone had just set down a plane and wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped outside for a breath. But no, one had been inside this car in 30 years. Miriam Covington had paid $2 for this railroad car at a sealed bid auction. $2, lot 14. No one else wanted it. No one else even knew what was inside. But Miriam knew the car number, because 2 years after her husband died, she had found a scrap of paper in his toolbox that she was never supposed to find. And what that scrap of paper set in motion would take 11 days to play out, and by the end of those 11 days, Miriam would know things about her family that could not be unknown. In 11 days, Miriam Covington would sit in a storage unit in Radford, Virginia, with a laptop open to 4 camera feeds and a track phone recording her own brother-in-law's voice. And she would learn that the man her husband had trusted most in the world had been stealing from her for 6 years. She would learn which of her 3 children would help him do it. And she would learn that the thing her husband had hidden inside this railroad car, the thing that had not moved in 30 years, was not valuable because of what it was worth. It was valuable because of what it proved about who Earl Covington had been, and who the people around her had become in his absence. But that is the end of the story. And to understand why Miriam Covington was standing in a fog-soaked gravel lot with borrowed bolt cutters and a 14-year-old beagle, you have to go back to a Sunday morning, 6 years earlier, when a good man's heart stopped in the middle of making breakfast, and everything he had been building in secret stopped with it. Earl Covington was a maintenance-of-way foreman for the Norfolk and Western Railway, later Norfolk Southern, for 34 years. He maintained track and right-of-way along a stretch of line between Bluefield and Radford, through some of the most remote and beautiful country in Western Virginia. He knew every siding, every culvert, every bridge abutment by number and by feel. He was the kind of man who came home with his knuckles scraped and his boots muddy, and never once complained about either. He kept his boots by the back door and his paycheck in the joint account, and his opinions to himself, unless someone asked. And even then he was careful. He was 67 years old when he died, on a Sunday morning in April, 6 years before this story begins. He was standing at the kitchen stove making Miriam's eggs. She liked them over easy. He always broke the yolk, and they had the same joke about it every Sunday for 40 years. He was dead before he hit the floor. The eggs burned. Miriam smelled them from the bedroom and came downstairs and found him on the linoleum, with his left hand still reaching toward the stove knob. Copper was 8 then. He was lying beside Earl with his nose against Earl's hand, and he did not move when Miriam knelt down, and he did not move when the paramedics came, and he did not move until Miriam picked him up and carried him outside. In 40 years Miriam had never found a single thing Earl had hidden from her. She was certain of this. She was certain of it until 2 years after his death, when she finally forced herself to clean out his workshop, a detached garage behind the house where Earl kept his tools and his solitude, and the smell of sawdust that Miriam could detect on him even after he showered. Earl's red Craftsman toolbox, the big rolling one with the ball-bearing drawers, had a locked bottom drawer. Miriam had never opened it. It was Earl's work drawer, full of rail gauge templates and torque specifications, and the small mechanical mysteries of a man who fixed things for a living. She found the key on his old keyring, the one with the Norfolk and Western fob that was worn smooth from 34 years in his pocket. Inside the bottom drawer, beneath a layer of service manuals and maintenance bulletins, she found a single piece of paper. It was a scrap of graph paper, the kind Earl used for track schematics, and on it, in his blocky pencil handwriting, were 3 lines. NW 7741, Ingalls Ferry Siding. Not finished yet. Forgive me. That was all. No date, no context, just a car number, a location, and an apology. Miriam sat on the concrete floor of the workshop with the graph paper in her hands for a long time. She did not cry. She had done most of her crying in the first year, and what was left was not grief exactly, but a kind of alert confusion, the feeling of finding a door in a wall you thought you knew completely. She did not know what NW 7741 was, but she knew how to find out. Miriam Covington had spent 31 years working in the Bland County Assessor's Office, cross-referencing property deeds, tax records, easement filings, and survey plats. She was the person who noticed when a decimal point was in the wrong place, when a parcel number did not match a survey boundary, when a signature sat a quarter-inch too high on the line. She had a gift for discrepancy. Other people noticed weather. Miriam noticed when things did not add up. She pulled Norfolk and Western surplus equipment records from the county clerk's archive, her old workplace. She still had friends there. She found that NW 7741 was a standard 40-foot boxcar, decommissioned in 1987, assigned to a maintenance siding at Ingalls Ferry, which was the same siding where Earl's crew had been based for the last 15 years of his career. The car had been surplused by Norfolk Southern when the line was rationalized in the late 80s. It had sat on a stub track at Ingalls Ferry for 30 years, locked, unclaimed, listed on nobody's inventory, and eventually transferred to Bland County's surplus property holdings when the rail easement was vacated. Bland County scheduled a sealed bid surplus auction for October the 9th, a Tuesday. Lot 14 was NW 7741. Miriam submitted a bid of $2. She won. The next highest bidder, a man named Harley Jessup, whom Miriam had never heard of, bid $1.75. Miriam won by 25 cents. She mentioned the auction in passing to her brother-in-law, Gerald Covington, Earl's younger brother. Gerald's reaction was odd. He asked 3 times exactly which lot number she had bid on. Then he went quiet in a way that was not casual. It was the quiet of a man recalculating. Miriam noticed. She always noticed. Earl used to say, "The track tells you everything if you walk it slow enough." He said it about rail, but Miriam had come to understand he meant it about people too. When Miriam hauled open the door of NW7741 on that October morning, what she found inside was not railroad equipment. It was not salvage. It was not anything she could have predicted in 68 years of careful, observant living. The interior of the boxcar had been converted, by hand, over what must have been years, into a near-perfect replica of a 1940s Pullman sleeper compartment. There was a fold-down berth with hand-planed oak framing, the joints tight and clean and fitted without nails. There was a narrow writing desk with a hinged top. There were curtains, real curtains, green velvet, dusty but intact, hung on a brass rod that was slightly too long for the space, so that one end was shimmed with a folded piece of cardboard. There was a reading lamp wired to a dead 12-volt battery, and pinned to the walls, the desk and the berth frame were index cards, dozens of them, covered in Earl's blocky pencil handwriting. It was the honeymoon train. In October of 1978, Miriam and Earl Covington had honeymooned on the Powhatan Arrow, the Norfolk and Western passenger service from Roanoke to Chicago, a Pullman sleeper. She had worn a borrowed blue coat because she did not own one warm enough for the trip. He had carved their initials into the underside of the fold-down berth, MC plus EC 1078, and the porter had pretended not to see. She had laughed and told him they were going to get thrown off the train. Earl had been rebuilding that compartment, by hand, inside a surplus boxcar on a forgotten siding, for 28 years. 28 years of Sunday mornings and lunch breaks, and detours on the way home from work. It was supposed to be a surprise, a retirement gift, or an anniversary gift, or simply a thing he was building because he loved her, and because he remembered the train and the coat, and the way she had laughed when he carved their names. He died before he finished. The note said, "Not finished yet. Forgive me." Miriam sat inside the Pullman compartment for 45 minutes, with copper on the berth beside her. She read every index card. She ran her hand along the oak frame, and then she found the carved initials on the underside of the berth, MC plus EC. Recarved in Earl's hand, transferred from memory or from love, or from both. And she pressed her thumb against the letters and held it there until the wood warmed. She found a sealed envelope taped to the inside of the berth frame, addressed in Earl's handwriting, "For Miriam, when you find this." She did not open it. Not yet. She put it in the inside pocket of Earl's canvas jacket and buttoned it shut. One of the index cards pinned near the berth frame read, "The oak for the berth frame came from the Jeffries place when they took down the barn. I traded Lyle Jeffries 2 days of fence work for it. You always said you loved the smell of oak. I hope you still do when you find this." Another card, pinned above the writing desk, read, "I know you will wonder why I never told you. The answer is that some things have to be finished to mean what they are supposed to mean. And I ran out of time. I am sorry." Miriam drove home with copper and the sealed letter, and sat at the kitchen table and thought. She did not call her children. She did not call Gerald. She thought about Gerald asking 3 times about the lot number. She thought about the $1.75 bid from a man named Harley Jessup. She thought about the way Dale, her eldest son, had started calling more often since Earl's death. Not to ask how she was, but to ask about Dad's things, about whether she had looked into what the property's really worth. She thought about the trust Earl had set up, the Covington Family Trust, and how Gerald, as informal co-trustee, handled the paperwork, and how for 6 years she had signed whatever Gerald put in front of her, because he was Earl's brother, and she trusted Earl's brother the way she had trusted Earl. And she thought about what Earl had written on that graph paper. "Not finished yet. Forgive me." He was not just apologizing for the Pullman compartment. He was apologizing because he knew, or suspected, that his family was not what Miriam believed it was, and he had not finished protecting her from that either. Miriam decided not to tell anyone what she had actually found. She would tell each family member, Dale, Patrice, Noel, and Gerald, a different version of what was inside NW7741, each version designed to suggest enormous financial value. Then she would watch what they did. She rented a 10 by 20 storage unit at Cardinal Self-Storage in Radford, Virginia. Unit 14B, $89 per month, paid cash. She hired a local contractor with a flatbed, a man named Ray Dunkel, to move the Pullman compartment from the boxcar to the unit. Ray asked no questions because Miriam paid him $400 in cash, and because people in this part of Virginia mind their own business about what goes into storage units. She drove to the Walmart in Christiansburg, 41 minutes each way, and bought 2 Wise outdoor cameras for $47.88, and a $29 TracFone with a prepaid SIM card. She mounted the cameras inside the storage unit, angled to cover the door and the Pullman compartment. She downloaded a voice-activated recording app onto the TracFone. She tested the feeds on her home laptop, 4 views tiled on the screen. 2 cameras, each with a wide and a zoomed angle. Everything ran through the storage facility's guest Wi-Fi, which Miriam accessed by asking the facility manager for the password for her phone, and then never using it on her phone. She seeded the stories. To Dale, her eldest son, age 44, an insurance adjuster in Roanoke, she said the car contained old railroad equipment. Some of it might be worth a lot. That Earl's friend said there could be antique signal lanterns and brass fittings, maybe $15,000 worth. She said this on the phone, casually, on a Wednesday. To Patrice, her middle daughter, age 41, an elementary school teacher who lived 20 minutes away, she said honestly that she had found something Earl built by hand, and that she was still looking at it. She did not inflate the value. Patrice was the control. To Noel, her youngest son, age 36, a freelance carpenter who lived in the converted garage behind Miriam's house, she said she had found some things of his father's, and Gerald thought they might be part of the estate, and she was not sure what to do. She watched whether Noel went to Gerald or came to her. To Gerald, Earl's younger brother, age 64, a semi-retired used equipment dealer. She said in person, at her kitchen table, with the TracFone in her purse, 6 inches from Gerald's elbow. I opened the car. You were right to be curious. There's quite a bit in there. I'm going to need your help figuring out what it's worth. While she installed the cameras in the storage unit, she reread one of Earl's index cards, one she had taken from the compartment and slipped into her pocket. It read, "Gerald will tell you he is helping. Watch his hands, not his mouth. I should have told you this years ago." Earl had known. He had suspected Gerald. He had never finished protecting her. Now she was finishing it herself. The test would begin on Saturday, October the 14th, 5 days after the auction. She gave herself 11 days. Whatever she knew by October the 25th, she would act on. The sealed letter from Earl stayed in her bedside drawer. She would not open it until the test was over. It was the last thing Earl wrote to her, and she would not read it until she had earned the right to understand what it meant. On Saturday morning, October the 14th, Miriam Covington sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, her reading glasses on, and Copper asleep at her feet, and she called her eldest son. The test had begun, and the first result would come faster than she expected, not from a phone call, but from a storage unit camera, at 2:47 in the morning. She made the calls in order. The call to Dale went out at 9:15 a.m. Dale was in Roanoke, an hour and a half away. He listened. He asked twice, "What kind of brass fittings, and have you had anyone appraise them yet?" He did not ask how she was feeling. He did not ask why his father had a locked railroad car she never knew about. He did not ask a single question about Earl. He asked about the fittings. Gerald came over for coffee at 11. He arrived at 10:48, 12 minutes early, which was unusual for a man who had been late to every family event for a decade. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and leaned forward when Miriam mentioned the car. He said, "Miriam, you need to be careful with this. There could be tax implications, estate implications. Let me look into it for you." His right hand was flat on the table, his left hand was in his lap, and he was rubbing his thumb against his index finger. Miriam had seen that gesture before. Earl used to point it out to her with a raised eyebrow across the Thanksgiving table. Earl had said it once, years ago, about Gerald, on the drive home from a family dinner. "My brother counts things. He counts the silverware after dinner. He counts the bottles in the wine rack when he thinks no one is looking. A man who counts what isn't his is telling you who he is." Miriam called Patrice at 1:30. Patrice listened, and then said, "Mom, are you okay? That must have been strange, finding something of Dad's like that. Do you want me to come over?" Miriam said she was fine. Patrice came over anyway, at 3 o'clock, with a casserole dish of chicken and dumplings, because Patrice had always been the one who came with food. Miriam called Noel at 5. He was out back in the converted garage. She could hear his table saw. He came inside. He listened. He said, "What do you think Dad was doing with a railroad car?" He seemed genuinely confused. Then he asked, "Did Uncle Gerald know about this?" Miriam said she had told Gerald yes. Noel was quiet for 4 seconds, and Miriam counted every one of them, and then he said, "Just be careful, Mom. Gerald's got opinions about money." That was the first hint. Noel had noticed something about Gerald, too. Miriam's mental tally was not a list. It was a feeling, the same feeling she used to get at work when a column of numbers looked right at first glance, but felt wrong in the way they sat on the page. Dale asked about value. Gerald asked about control. Patrice asked about Miriam. Noel asked about Gerald. She wrote nothing down. She did not need to. 31 years of noticing decimal points. She could not sleep that night. At 2:30 in the morning she opened her laptop in bed, Copper wheezing softly behind her, and pulled up the Wise camera feeds. 4 views tiled on the screen. The storage facility was dark. Unit 14B's interior glowed in night vision green. Nothing moved. At 2:47 a.m., Camera 1 registered motion. A figure at the storage unit's roll-up door. The person was trying the handle. Gently, not forcing it. Testing whether it would give. They wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. In the night vision image they looked spectral, washed in green, their face a smear of light and shadow. The figure produced a key, not bolt cutters, not a pry bar, a key. They tried it in the padlock Miriam had installed. It did not work. Miriam had used a new lock, not the facility's standard one. The figure tried the key twice more, then stepped back and looked at the lock for a long moment, the way a person looks at a problem they expected to have already solved. Then they pulled out a phone and made a call. They spoke for about 90 seconds. Miriam could not hear the words. The Wise cameras had limited audio range, especially through the metal door, and the figure was outside the unit. But she could see the posture. This was not a conversation between equals. This was someone reporting in. To someone, the figure left at 2:53 a.m., 6 minutes total. They walked to a truck parked at the far end of the lot. It was a dark-colored Ford F-150, older model, extended cab. Miriam could not read the plate, but she recognized the body style. It was the same generation as the truck Gerald drove. She did not call the police. She did not panic. She sat in the dark with her laptop and her beagle, and she thought. Because the person with the key, a key that meant they expected the old lock to still be there, had known about the storage unit before Miriam told anyone about it, which meant either someone had followed her, or someone had already known about NW7741 and had been tracking it for a very long time. She thought about one of Earl's index cards, one she had read in a different light now. It said, "I changed the lock on the car twice. Someone kept trying the door. I don't know who. I stopped going for 3 months and started again when the snow came, because nobody checks the siding in winter." Earl had dealt with this too. Someone had been trying to get into the car while he was alive. Miriam's test was already bigger than she had planned. She worked the logic slowly, the way she had once worked a mismatched parcel number through 17 pages of survey records. She had told 4 people about the car's contents on Saturday. The break-in attempt happened at 2:47 Sunday morning, less than 18 hours later. The person had a key, not picks, not a crowbar. A key they expected to work. The old lock on NW774, one had been a Norfolk and Western maintenance lock, standard issue to foremen and section crews. Earl would have had one. Gerald, who had worked briefly for the railroad in the 1980s, before quitting to deal in used equipment, would also have had access to one. But Miriam was careful. She did not leap to Gerald. She assembled. She noticed she added 1 column at a time. On Monday she stopped by Cardinal Self-Storage and spoke with the facility manager, a woman named Connie Deal, who knew Miriam from church. She asked Connie to pull the access log for Saturday night into Sunday morning. Connie found the entry. A vehicle had accessed the gate at 2:38 a.m. using a generic entry code, the code the previous renter of Unit 14B had been given, which should have been deactivated, but had not been. Connie pulled the gate camera footage, but the image quality was poor. Dark-colored truck, extended cab, older F-150. No readable plate, but the access code. That code belonged to the previous renter of the unit. Miriam asked Connie who that had been. Connie checked the records. The previous renter was a company called Blue Ridge Equipment Clearing, LLC. Miriam did not recognize the name, but she recognized the format. An LLC with a generic Appalachian name was exactly the kind of shell a used equipment dealer would set up. She wrote it down. On Wednesday, Dale drove down from Roanoke. He said he wanted to check on Mum. Within 15 minutes he was asking to see the storage unit. Miriam took him. She unlocked Unit 14B with her own padlock key. Dale stepped inside, looked at the Pullman compartment, and his face did something complicated. He was calculating, not marveling. He ran his hand along the oak berth frame and said, "This is solid wood, Mum. You could get real money for this." He did not notice the carved initials. He did not ask what a Pullman sleeper compartment was doing inside a boxcar. He did not ask about his father. Miriam watched Dale the way she used to watch property records. She watched for the decimal point that did not belong. Dale took 3 photos with his phone. He texted someone while standing in the unit. Camera 2 captured the screen angle, and when Miriam reviewed the footage later, she could see that the text went to a contact labeled GC. Gerald Covington. There was an index card pinned above the writing desk in the compartment that Miriam had read the day she discovered it all. Earl had written, "Dale has your eyes and my stubbornness. But he got Gerald's arithmetic. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope he is more yours than mine." Someone was working with Gerald. Dale was the likely connection. And the question Miriam needed answered next was what Blue Ridge Equipment Clearing, LLC, had to do with a railroad car that had been locked for 30 years. On Tuesday, October the 19th, Miriam invited Gerald over for coffee again. He arrived at 11, on time this visit, settling into the kitchen chair like a man who had rehearsed his ease. The track phone was in Miriam's purse, on the chair beside her, the recording app running. She told him she had been thinking about getting the storage unit's contents appraised. She said casually, "Connie at the storage place said someone tried the door the other night. Used an old code. Isn't that strange?" Gerald did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He took a sip of coffee and said, "Probably kids. You know how it is out there." Then he leaned forward, and his voice shifted into something warmer, something practiced. And he said the thing that Miriam's track phone captured, voice-activated, clear as a bell. "Miriam, listen. I've been thinking. That car, what Earl put in there, you don't know what you're sitting on. There are people who collect this kind of thing. Pullman memorabilia. It could be worth $60,000, $70,000. But you have to go through the right channels. You can't just list it somewhere. Let me handle the appraisal. I know people." Gerald had just told Miriam the contents were Pullman memorabilia. She had never said the word Pullman to him. She had never described what was inside. She had said only quite a bit, and that she needed help figuring out what it was worth. Gerald knew. Gerald had always known. Miriam's logic assembled itself with the quiet precision of a property ledger that has finally been reconciled. Gerald named the contents without being told, which meant he had independent knowledge. Gerald was offering to control the appraisal, which meant controlling the declared value. If Gerald controlled the value, and Gerald was co-trustee of the Covington Family Trust, Gerald could route the asset through the trust, undervalue it, and either buy it himself or sell it through a shell like Blue Ridge Equipment Clearing, LLC. Miriam said, "That sounds like a good idea, Gerald. Let me think about it." Gerald left at 2:15. He was smiling. He thought he had won. Earl had said it once, at the dinner table, years ago, about Gerald. Miriam remembered it now with the clarity of something she had filed and cross-referenced, without knowing it. He tried to buy the Ingalls Ferry lot from under the company once. They caught him. He told everyone it was a misunderstanding. It is always a misunderstanding with Gerald. Gerald knew about the car's contents before the auction. The question now was how deep the fraud went. Was it just the car, or had Gerald been stealing from the trust all along? On Thursday, October the 21st, Miriam drove to the Bland County Clerk's office, her old workplace. She visited her former colleague, a woman named Darlene Hobbs, who had worked in the filing room for 26 years, and who knew the inside of a document cabinet the way a surgeon knows the inside of a chest. Miriam asked, carefully as a private citizen, not making an accusation, whether anyone had filed anything recently related to the Covington family trust or to her name. Darlene checked, and she found it. It was a power of attorney form, filed on October the 17th, 3 days after Miriam told Gerald about the car's contents. It granted Gerald Covington full authority to manage, appraise, sell or otherwise dispose of any railroad-related assets acquired by or on behalf of Miriam L. Covington. The form had Miriam's signature on it. Miriam did not sign it. She had never seen this document. Darlene said the form had been filed by a notary named Harley Jessup, the same Harley Jessup who had bid $1.75 on the railroad car at the auction. Jessup, it turned out, was a licensed notary in addition to being a used equipment buyer, and he was Gerald's business associate. He had notarized a forged signature. Miriam looked at the signature on the forged power of attorney, and immediately saw the tell. It was a good forgery. Someone had studied her handwriting, but the L in her middle initial looped left. Miriam's real L looped right. She had signed her name on approximately 40,000 documents over 31 years. She knew her own L the way she knew her own heartbeat. Darlene had not yet processed the filing. It was sitting in the queue. Virginia law required a waiting period for power of attorney filings involving real property or trust assets. Miriam asked Darlene to hold the filing, not reject it. Just hold it, and Darlene agreed. She agreed because she had known Miriam for 31 years, and because a forged signature is a forged signature regardless of who filed it. Miriam now had enough to go to the police, but she did not go. Not yet. Because the forged power of attorney only covered the railroad car. Miriam suspected the fraud was deeper, that Gerald had been skimming from the trust for years, and she wanted the full picture before she acted. She had 4 days left on her timeline. That evening she reread the last index card she had found in the Pullman compartment, the one pinned to the green velvet curtain, as if Earl had put it there last, on his final visit. It read, "I wish I had told you everything while I could still talk. But I was afraid you would look at my family the way I had started to look at them, and I did not want that for you. I wanted you to keep the good version. I'm sorry." The good version was not the real one. On Friday, October the 22nd, Noel knocked on the back door. He came into the kitchen and sat down. He looked tired in the way people look tired when they have been carrying something heavier than they want to admit. He said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." Noel said that Gerald had approached him 3 months earlier, before the auction, before Miriam even knew about the car. Gerald had asked Noel to help him clear out some of Dad's old railroad stuff from a siding near Ingalls Ferry. Gerald said there was equipment in a locked car that belonged to the family, and that Miriam did not need to be involved because it would just upset her. Noel was suspicious, but did not act. He did not help Gerald, but he also did not tell Miriam. He had been carrying the guilt of that silence for 3 months. Then Noel said the thing that tightened the last bolt. He said that Dale was at Gerald's house when Gerald made the pitch. Dale was sitting at the table. Dale did not say no. Dale did not say yes. Dale listened, and then he asked, "What's it worth?" The same question Dale had asked Miriam about the contents of the storage unit. The same question, in the same voice, with the same arithmetic behind it. Miriam reached across the table and put her hand on Noel's forearm, and she said, "I know. Your father would have understood. He kept quiet too, for too long." Miriam now had the full picture. Gerald had been running a scheme, skimming from the trust, setting up a shell company, planting a bidder at the auction, forging a power of attorney. Dale, at minimum, had known and had not objected. Noel had known something was wrong and failed to act. Patrice had never been involved. Miriam had camera footage, a recorded phone call, a forged document, and a witness. She would spring the trap on October the 25th, as planned. She would invite Gerald, Dale, Patrice, and Noel to the storage unit. She would show them what Earl built, and then she would show them what she recorded. Miriam had 3 days. 3 days to pull together 30 years of trust records, 6 years of Gerald's management fees, and 1 forged signature, and to lay it all on the fold-down berth of a Pullman sleeper that a dead man had built by hand for the woman he loved. The sealed letter was still in her bedside drawer. She still had not opened it. But she was beginning to understand what it would say. Miriam Covington spent 31 years noticing what other people missed. A misplaced decimal, a signature that looped the wrong way, a brother-in-law who arrived 12 minutes early for the first time in his life. If that kind of patience means something to you, if you want to see how this ends, take a second and subscribe. This story has 3 days left, and every one of them matters. On Saturday, October the 22nd, Miriam sat at her kitchen table with a box of files she had pulled from the Covington Family Trust's records. Gerald kept them in a filing cabinet at his house, but Miriam, as beneficiary, had the legal right to request them, and she had done so 2 weeks before the auction, telling Gerald she wanted to understand Earl's wishes better. Gerald had given them over without suspicion, because he did not know Miriam had already found the toolbox note. The trust Earl established in 2009, 5 years before his death, held 3 assets. The family home, Miriam's house, held in trust with a life estate for Miriam, a half-acre commercial lot on Route 100, rented to a farm supply store for $1,200 a month, and a savings account originally funded with $62,000 from Earl's railroad pension buyout. Gerald, as informal co-trustee, the one who handled the paperwork while Miriam deferred because he was Earl's brother, and she trusted Earl's brother, had been doing 3 things. First, he had been writing himself management fees of $350 per month for trust administration since Earl's death. 72 months multiplied by $350. $25,200. There was no provision in the trust document for management fees. Miriam had never approved them. Gerald had simply written himself checks from the trust account. Second, he had been diverting rental income from the Route 100 lot. The tenant paid $1,200 a month. Gerald had been depositing $900 into the trust account and keeping $300 for himself. 72 months multiplied by $300. $21,600. He had told Miriam the rent was $900. She had never checked because she had trusted Earl's brother. Total skimmed, approximately $46,800 over 6 years. 3 of the management fee checks had been deposited into an account belonging to Blue Ridge Equipment Clearing, LLC. Gerald's shell company, the same company that had previously rented Unit 14B at Cardinal Self-Storage. The connection to the railroad car was now clear. Gerald did not just want the Pullman compartment. He wanted to control Miriam's discovery of it, so he could undervalue it, route it through the trust, sell it to his own shell company for a fraction of its worth, and pocket the difference. He had planted Harley Jessup at the auction to buy the car for $1.75, but Miriam's $2 bid had beaten him by a quarter, 25 cents. Gerald's entire plan had collapsed because of 25 cents. Miriam spread the bank statements on the kitchen table and cross-referenced them with the trust document and the lease agreement for the Route 100 lot, which she had obtained from the county clerk's office because it was filed as a commercial lease and was public record. The discrepancy was obvious to someone who spent 31 years reading ledgers. The deposits did not match the rent. The management fees were not in the trust, and the checks flowed to a company that Gerald had registered with himself as agent. The danger was real and specific. If Gerald realized Miriam was investigating, he could destroy records, close the Blue Ridge Equipment Clearing account, or most dangerously, file additional forged documents to seize control of the trust assets before Miriam could act. The forged power of attorney was still sitting in the clerk's office queue. Darlene was holding it, but she could not hold it indefinitely without a formal objection. If Miriam did not file a challenge by October the 27th, the filing would be processed by default. Dale was a wild card. Miriam did not know how deep his involvement went. If Dale warned Gerald that Miriam was suspicious, everything would accelerate. Miriam's self-imposed deadline was October the 25th. The filing deadline was October the 27th. She had a 2-day margin. If she missed it, Gerald would have legal authority over any railroad-related assets, and with a creative lawyer he could argue that encompassed the entire trust. On Sunday night, October the 23rd at 10:14 p.m., Miriam was checking the camera feeds when she saw it. Dale's car was at the storage facility. Not Gerald's truck. Dale's Nissan Altima silver Virginia plates she recognized. Dale was at the gate entering a code. He got in. He drove to Unit 14B. He did not get out of the car. He sat there for 7 minutes with his headlights pointed at the unit door, and then he made a phone call. Then he drove away. Dale sat in his car with the headlights on the door for 7 minutes. He did not get out. He did not try the lock. He made one phone call, and then he left. Miriam watched the taillights on camera 1 until they turned onto the access road and disappeared. It was 10:21 p.m. She had 47 hours until her deadline. She was watching her eldest son case a storage unit for his uncle. This was her child. She had carried him, she had driven him to Little League practice in the rain. She had sat in the front row at his high school graduation and clapped until her palms stung. And here he was, at 10:14 on a Sunday night, checking the locks for a man who had been stealing from her for 6 years. Miriam closed the laptop. She sat in the dark with her hand on Copper's back. The room was silent except for the dog's breathing and the ticking of the baseboard heater. And the silence said everything the narrator did not need to. Monday, October the 24th. The day before. She assembled her evidence the way she had once assembled assessment files, tabbed and organized and irrefutable. Camera footage, the 2:47 a.m. break-in attempt from October the 15th. Dale's 10:14 p.m. Visit from October the 23rd. And Dale texting the contact labeled GC from inside the storage unit. 3 clips saved to a USB drive. Audio recording. Gerald's Tuesday conversation in the kitchen, where he had named Pullman memorabilia without being told. 1 recording, saved on the track phone. Documents. The forged power of attorney with the wrong looping L. The trust bank statements showing the management fee skimming and rental income diversion. The lease agreement proving the rent was $1,200, not $900. The Blue Ridge Equipment Clearing LLC filing from the State Corporation Commission, which Miriam had pulled online and which listed Gerald as registered agent. 1 manila folder, tabbed and ordered. Witness? Noel, who would confirm Gerald's pre-auction approach and Dale's presence at the table. She called each person, Gerald, Dale, Patrice and Noel, and invited them to the storage unit on Tuesday, October the 25th, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She told them she had decided to have the Pullman compartment professionally appraised, and she wanted the family there to discuss what to do with it. Gerald accepted immediately. Dale said he would try to make it. He would make it, Patrice said, of course. Noel said he would be there. Miriam called Connie at the storage facility and asked her to make sure the cameras were running and to be available as a witness if needed. She called Darlene at the clerk's office and told her to formally flag the forged power of attorney for review. Darlene did so, which meant Gerald's filing was now officially under challenge. That night, Monday, October the 24th, at 11 o'clock, Miriam sat on her bed with the sealed letter in her hands. She turned it over. Earl's handwriting, for Miriam, when you find this. She did not open it. She put it in the inside pocket of Earl's canvas jacket, the same pocket where she had placed it the day she opened the car, and she buttoned it shut. She set the alarm for 6 a.m. In 8 hours she would drive to Radford, unlock a storage unit, and stand inside a Pullman sleeper that her husband had built with his bare hands for 28 years, and she would show 4 people exactly who they were. The sealed letter rode against her heart, unopened, like a second pulse. Tuesday, October the 25th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Cardinal Self-Storage, Radford, Virginia. The unit was open. The Pullman compartment stood in the center, lit by the overhead fluorescent, and by the compartment's own reading lamp, which Miriam had connected to a fresh 12-volt battery that morning. The green velvet curtains were drawn back. The fold-down berth was down, made up with a clean quilt Miriam had brought from home. Earl's index cards were still pinned to the walls. Gerald arrived first. 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes early. He walked into the unit and looked at the compartment, and his face went still in a way that told Miriam everything she needed confirmed. He had seen this before, or at least he had known about it longer than he had ever admitted. His eyes moved over the berth frame, the curtains, the brass rod, with the practiced recognition of a man surveying an asset, not a discovery. Dale arrived at 2:03. Patrice at 2 exactly, carrying a thermos of coffee. Noel at 2:05, standing near the door with his arms crossed, his jaw set. Miriam let them look. She let the silence build the way silence builds, in a room where everyone knows something is about to change. But no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. Then she spoke. "Your father built this for me. It took him 28 years. It's a Pullman sleeper, like the one we honeymooned in. He carved our initials into the berth." She pointed. MC plus EC, 1078. Cut into the underside of the fold-down oak frame. "Now let me show you what I found after I found this." She opened the manila folder. She held up the forged power of attorney so Gerald could see it. "This was filed at the county clerk's office on October the 17th, with my signature on it. I did not sign it. My L loops right. This one loops left. Harley Jessup notarized it. Harley Jessup also bid $1.75 on this railroad car at the auction. You know Harley Jessup, don't you, Gerald?" Gerald's face changed. The color left the skin around his mouth. The hand that had been resting on the berth frame lifted and curled into a fist at his side. He took a half step backward. She laid the bank statements on the fold-down berth. $350 a month in management fees for 72 months. $25,200. There are no management fees in the trust document. I checked. She laid the lease agreement next to the statements. The tenant pays $1,200 a month. You deposited $900, $21,600. She turned the laptop around on the berth. The footage was cued. 2:47 a.m., October the 15th. Someone tried the door with a key, and 3 days later, Dale texted you from inside this unit. She looked at Dale. Dale was looking at his shoes. She looked at Gerald. Gerald said nothing for 11 seconds. The cameras counted them. Then he said, "Miriam, you don't understand. I understand arithmetic, Gerald. I've been doing it for 31 years. The room was silent, except for the hum of the reading lamp, and the distant sound of a truck passing on the road outside the storage facility. Both cameras were running. The trach phone was running. Every word Gerald said from this point was on record. And then Miriam reached into the inside pocket of Earl's canvas jacket and took out the sealed letter. She had been carrying it for 11 days. Through the camera footage and the recorded conversations and the forged signature and the midnight hours with the laptop and the beagle, and the knowledge that her family was fracturing along lines she had not known existed, she had carried it buttoned against her chest, like a promise she had made to a man who could not hear her keep it. She opened the envelope with her thumbnail. The paper inside was a single sheet of graph paper, folded twice. Earl's handwriting. The pencil was faded but legible. "Dear Miriam, if you are reading this, you found the car, and I did not finish it in time. I am sorry for that. I wanted to give you the train back, the one from our honeymoon, the one where you wore the blue coat, and I carved our names into the berth, and you laughed and said I was going to get us thrown off. I started building this the year after your mother died, because you said once that the happiest you had ever been was on that train with me, and I wanted you to have a place to go back to. It was supposed to be ready for our 40th anniversary. I suppose it is ready now, whenever now is. I need to tell you something I should have told you while I was alive. Gerald has not been honest with you or with me. I caught him twice taking money from the business before I retired, and I caught him once trying to buy the Ingalls Ferry siding land through a friend of his. I never confronted him. I was a coward about my own brother. I am sorry for that too. When I am gone, Gerald will offer to help you with the trust. He will seem kind. He will count things. Watch his hands, not his mouth. And if something doesn't add up, trust yourself. You have always been better with numbers than anyone I know. I love you. I loved you on the train, and I love you now, Earl. Miriam read the letter silently. She folded it and put it back in the pocket and buttoned it shut. She looked at Gerald and said, simply, Earl knew. Gerald sat down on the edge of the berth frame, the berth Earl had built with oak from the Jeffreys barn, and he put his face in his hands. He did not deny it. He did not perform outrage or confusion or innocence. He sat there, and the 11 seconds of silence from before stretched into something longer, something that filled the storage unit like weather. Patrice was crying. Not because she was implicated, but because she was watching her family come apart on the fold-down berth of a train her father had built with his own hands. Over 28 years. She stood beside Miriam and did not move. Noah was at the door, his jaw tight, his arms still crossed, and when Miriam's eyes found his, he stepped forward and said, I should have told you sooner, Miriam said. You told me when it mattered. That's enough. She turned to Gerald. Her voice was steady, not cold, not warm, just level, the voice of a woman who had spent 31 years reading ledgers, and had finally reconciled the last one. She told him he had 48 hours to retain an attorney and begin the process of full restitution. Every dollar of the management fees. Every dollar of the diverted rent. And the cost of the forged filing. If he did not, she would take the evidence to the Bland County Sheriff and the Virginia State Bar for Harley Jessup's notary fraud. Gerald nodded. He did not look up. She turned to Dale. Dale was 44 years old, and he could not meet her eyes. His hands were in his pockets. His phone, the one he had used to text Gerald from this very room, was in his right pocket, and Miriam could see the outline of it through the fabric. She said, You have a choice, Dale. You can be part of what Gerald did, or you can be part of fixing it. I am giving you one chance, because you're my son, and because your father loved you. But I will not give you two. Dale said, I'm sorry, Mom. His voice cracked on the word Mom. It was the first genuine thing he had said in this entire story. Not a question about value. Not a calculation. Just the sound of a man who had been caught and, underneath the shame, was relieved. Patrice put her hand on Miriam's arm. She did not need to be addressed. She had never needed to be addressed. She had been standing in the right place from the beginning. Gerald retained an attorney within 36 hours. The restitution process began in November. Miriam did not file criminal charges, not out of mercy, but out of practicality. A criminal case would tie up the trust assets in legal proceedings for years. And Miriam was 68 years old and did not have years to waste on Gerald's accounting. He signed a consent order repaying $46,800 in installments, secured against his property. His name was removed as co-trustee. Harley Jessup's notary license was reported to the Virginia Secretary of the Commonwealth, and it was suspended pending investigation. Gerald and Miriam have not spoken since October the 25th. Dale drove to Miriam's house the following Saturday. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Gerald had sat and Miriam had recorded him. And he said, I didn't take anything. But I knew, and I didn't stop it, and I don't know how to fix that. Miriam looked at her son for a long time and then said, You fix it by being here when there is nothing to gain. Dale has been coming to dinner every other Sunday since November. He does not ask about the trust. He does not ask about the Pullman compartment. He asks about copper. Patrice helped Miriam hire a proper trust attorney, a woman in Blacksburg recommended by Patrice's husband. The trust was restructured, with Miriam as sole trustee and Patrice as successor. The Route 100 rental income, all $1,200 of it, now deposits directly into the trust account each month. Noel volunteered to finish what Earl started. He and a friend moved the Pullman compartment from the storage unit to Miriam's property, setting it on a gravel pad behind the house, under a stand of red oaks whose leaves were at peak color the day they placed it. Noel completed the interior work Earl had left undone. The writing desk's hinged top, which had not closed flush. The reading lamp's wiring, which had been spliced but not soldered. The brass curtain rod, which needed one more bracket to hang true. Noel followed Earl's index card notes like blueprints, reading his father's handwriting the way his father had once read track schematics, carefully, slowly, with respect for what the lines meant. The compartment became a small heritage attraction. Miriam listed it on a local tourism website as a Pullman sleeper experience, available for overnight stays at $75 a night. The first guests were a retired couple from Roanoke, who had honeymooned on the Powhatan Arrow in 1982. They left a note on the writing desk. "Thank you for keeping the train alive." The test had revealed not only a fraud, but a hierarchy of character. Gerald stole, Dale enabled. Noel hesitated but came back. Patrice never wavered. And Earl knew, and he left the evidence in the only place Miriam would find it, inside the gift he had built for her with his own hands. Late November. First frost. The mountains around Miriam's property were bare except for the oaks, which held their leaves longer than anything else, as oaks do, the color gone from red to rust to the deep brown of something that has decided to stay. Miriam was sitting inside the Pullman compartment, on a folding chair she had brought from the kitchen. The berth was made up for a guest arriving that afternoon. Copper was on the berth. He had claimed it as his personal bed, and Miriam let him, because he was 14 and because it was the kind of thing Earl would have allowed. She was wearing the canvas jacket. The sealed letter was back in the inside pocket, refolded, rebuttoned, riding against her heart where it had ridden for 11 days in October, and where it would ride for as long as the jacket held together. The reading lamp was on. The green velvet curtains were drawn against the cold. The linseed oil smell had faded, replaced by the smell of the red oaks outside, and the faint sweetness of old wood, warmed by a space heater Noel had wired in the week before. Miriam looked at the carved initials on the underside of the berth, MC plus EC, 1078. She ran her finger over them, the way she had run her finger over the graph paper, note the day she found it in the toolbox. Slowly, as if the letters themselves were warm. Earl had written. In the letter she now knew by heart. "I wanted you to have a place to go back to." The bolt cutters were back at Lewis Dalton's house. The car number NW7741 was stenciled on a plaque Noel had made and mounted by the door. Copper was snoring on the berth, and Miriam Covington, 68 years old, sat inside the thing her husband had spent half a lifetime building for her. And she did not need to go anywhere at all.